Evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in our country over the past week or so. And as the norm is in Guyana, in any given week, there are always a large number of issues worthy of discussion. This week is no different. But as usual, I want to uh, say good evening to all of our viewers who are joining us from Mahaika to West Coast Berbice on television in region number 5. Good evening. To all of you who are joining us on television in region number 5, good evening. Across the Berbice River on the east bank of the Berbice River, from Mara all the way to New Amsterdam, good evening and welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And of course, from Kanji all the way to the Quarantine Coast, Molson Creek and Crabwood Creek, and all those people who are joining us on the Quarantine Coast on television, good evening. Those of you who are joining us on Freedom Radio, good evening from Robb Street, Georgetown. And good evening also to all of you who are joining us on various platforms. On the Facebook Live, good evening. Good evening to all of you who are joining us across the length and breadth of Guyana. Good evening to all of you who are joining us across the Caribbean and, of course, North America, Europe, Asia, and as far as Australia and New Zealand. Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News. And please press that share button on your phone, press that share button on your computer, press that share button icon on your Facebook page, on your Facebook account, so that as many persons as possible can join this discussion. And as I promise, I want to make this discussion as interactive as possible, and hundreds, if not thousands of you have already joined on Facebook. Rabindra Prasad, Kevin Samaru, Arti Sivasankar, Annette Singh. I saw Nalini Chintaman, Kapil Dev K. Sadhu from New York, Keith Benjamin, and so many of you, Nick Narain, and all of you, Madra Mutu from California, Francis Kunji, Pamela Prasad. Please, all of you, press that share button on your phone so that we can go and have as many persons as possible. Louisiana is in the house, Florida is in the house, Toronto is in the house, Montreal is in the house, Region 5 is in the house, and so many people. Toronto, Canada, California, San Francisco, Maryland, Cancun. So we have the world on show here tonight. Netherlands, United Kingdom, and so many of you. So please share that. Please press that share button on the phone so that we have the widest possible audience. And let me have your comments. Let me have your idea of what you think we should discuss. So tonight I want to begin by dealing with a very important issue for the democratic polity of our country: free and fair elections. As you know, free and fair elections is always a topical issue. And 70 years or so after independence, unfortunately, free and fair elections remain a matter that we have to struggle for, because there are those among us who wish to pervert our electoral process, who prefer to steal an election rather than win government by the ballot. So, in the public domain, they continue to peddle. They continue to peddle the discredited narrative that there were multiple voting at the last elections, that persons who were not in Guyana on elections day but were overseas on election day voted at the March 2nd elections, and also that deceased persons voted at the March 2nd elections. You will recall that when those allegations were made during the national recount at the Arthur Chung Conference Center, they submitted a document to the then chairman of GCOM, they meaning the APNU as a political party. When they realized that they would have lost the elections, they submitted a document to the chairman of the Elections Commission, which they claim contained the names and relevant information of persons whom they claim voted at the elections, but whom were dead, were overseas on the day of voting, and who voted multiple times. They submitted that document. The CARICOM team that oversaw the recount rejected those allegations as completely unfounded, without merit, and wholly baseless. They documented that in a report. And they were told to file an elections petition. They filed the elections petition, and they were so incompetent that the election petition was not heard because they did not serve it in accordance with the rules governing elections petition. Then, notwithstanding all of those failed attempts, they continued to peddle this narrative about ghost voting at elections, multiple voting at elections, and fraudulent voting at elections by persons who were not in Guyana at the time of voting. As a result, on behalf of the government of Guyana, I wrote to the chairperson of GCOM requesting the documents that were supplied to her by the APNU AFC during the recount process. In the letter, I highlighted that they presented to GCOM what purported to be data, personal information of persons whom they said they gathered from the authorized state agencies, meaning the Immigration Department and possibly the General Registrar's Office, and they claimed that those information were authentic, and that is what they based their claims and allegations on. As I said, the information was completely discredited because persons themselves came forward whose name appeared on those documents as being in America. Those persons were in Guyana and they came forward. They spoke to the media. They denounced the contention that they were in America and that they were in Guyana. They asserted that they were in Guyana and confirmed that they voted lawfully. Some of them were labeled as dead people. They came forward to show that they were alive and that they voted on elections day, and so on. This is nothing new, but this allegation, as ridiculous as it is, continues to be peddled by the APNU AFC. So we wrote the chairman of GCOM requesting that document so that the relevant agencies that are implicated in these documents can conduct investigations, or the relevant agencies charged with the responsibility to investigate such conduct can be afforded the opportunity to investigate these documents, their authenticity, their accuracy, the accuracy and veracity of the information they purport to furnish, and to also determine, if possible, who instructed these documents to be prepared. At the end of this process, at the end of this inquiry and or investigation, whatever laws were violated, if any, will be enforced by the relevant law enforcement agencies. And if there is evidence to yield criminal charges, then criminal charges shall be instituted and shall be prosecuted in accordance with law. Our government does not intend for one moment any longer to countenance the belief in any person that what occurred on March the 2nd, 2020 and thereafter will ever occur again in Guyana. And every Guyanese owe themselves a duty, and they owe their country a duty to join hands with all law-abiding citizens and the government to ensure that this skullduggery and attempts at electoral fraud never occur again in this country. As I have often said, we in Guyana have first-hand knowledge and experience in terms of what rigged elections can do to a country, to its people, to the economy, and to the social components of society. It brings destruction at every layer of the society. And it is the duty of any government in office to protect the state machinery and to protect the state from such abuse, because that is what it is. Abuse of the law, abuse of the Constitution, and abuse of the electoral machinery. So every single one of these allegations are going to be investigated and interrogated. We already have 32 criminal charges pending. The Commission of Inquiry announced by the President will soon begin its work, and this is another component of the investigative process unfolding. So as soon as those documents are received from the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, the investigation will begin by the relevant state machinery, and hopefully it proceeds with due speed so that we can get a conclusion as early as is reasonably possible. So I thought that I'd make that very, very clear. An important regulation was promulgated under the hand of the Minister of Home Affairs last week under the Road Traffic and Motor Vehicles Act. And this regulation authorizes persons who are resident out of Guyana to be able to drive within Guyana for 60 days by using a valid driver's license issued in the country in which that person is ordinarily resident. So let me repeat. This regulation authorizes a person who is resident out of Guyana to be able to drive a motor vehicle within Guyana for 60 days after his entry into Guyana provided that he has a valid driver's license issued in the country in which he is ordinarily resident. He must also have some documents to establish the date of his entry into Guyana for the purpose of reckoning the time, because it's a tenuous license, meaning it's a license based on time. The time period is 60 days. So for the police officer or the relevant authority in Guyana to be able to enforce that regulation, they must be able to determine what date that person entered the country. A passport ought to provide that information. And once that information is established, then that person, using his driver's license in the country of his residence, will be permitted to drive a motor vehicle in Guyana. The question has been asked, what type of motor vehicle? Well, it is all classes of motor vehicle under the Motor Vehicle Act. In Guyana, our Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Act defines a vehicle, and a driver license authorizes you to drive such a vehicle, and the vehicle has a definition. So it is any engine-propelled vehicle. For simplicity, you will be able to drive the type of vehicle that your license authorizes you to drive in the country of your residence. That is a safe rule of thumb explanation. So if you have a driver's license that authorizes you to drive a car in the country of your resident, then in Guyana you will be allowed or permitted or authorized to drive that class of vehicle. So I thought that I would explain that, because a lot of people have been asking questions. That is a very positive development in our country, and it is bringing our legal architecture up to international standards. Most countries to which you may have traveled allows you temporary use of your driver's license in the country in which it was issued. Many countries allow that. We are now allowing that. Of course, if you want to drive beyond that, well, then you will have to get some type of authorization from the Guyana Revenue Authority. But for 60 days, you can drive using your foreign driver's license. So I think that that is a positive development, because many persons who come to Guyana on vacation and on business have complained that they have to join long lines to get a particular type of license that would authorize them to drive. Well, for 60 days, you don't have to get such a license. You can drive from the time you enter the country. Of course, you are expected to drive in accordance with the laws of our country. And that is an uncompromising duty. You must obey the laws of Guyana when you wish to drive, as Guyanese have to do when they go to foreign lands and they wish to use their driver's license to drive in those territories. Every country has its own laws, and any visitor to those countries must comply with the laws of that country. So today, I heard a very interesting disclosure from the leader of the opposition, Aubrey Norton, at his press conference. Now, you will recall that for the past 3 months, Mr. Norton has been saying no elections unless we have a clean voters list. He has been saying that the voters list is bloated. We have repeatedly explained that you cannot remove persons' names from that list once they are there unless the person becomes disqualified in accordance with the law. We have explained that persons are registered on that list by satisfying certain legal requirements set out in our Constitution and in our law. And once those names are entered upon that list, they can only be removed therefrom by satisfying disqualification criteria laid down in the law. So if a person dies, he is removed. If a person becomes bankrupt, he can be removed. Those are two grounds of disqualification that come to mind quickly. Mr. Norton was rejecting all of that. He's saying that is not the law and that the list is bloated and that persons' names must be removed from the list. And he had that very obstinate position. And that is what he does on every occasion. He takes maximum positions. He says that if that is not, that bloated list is not scrapped, then he will not go to an elections, and the GCOM chairperson must go. Go back and you will read him saying all of that, although we are trying to explain to him that what he is saying does not make sense in law, and that what he is asking for and what he is demanding would violate the Constitution and contravene the law. After we said it for about 3 months and we recognized that he is incapable of understanding what we are saying, or that he chooses not to understand what we are saying, we called upon GCOM. I called upon GCOM last week to educate Mr. Norton. I made that call right here. I asked GCOM on this program to issue a statement and educate Mr. Norton, because they may have better luck than we have. And perhaps GCOM listened to the call, because a few days after, GCOM issued a very elaborate and clear statement in the simplest of language, setting out the law in relation to how persons are registered and how they can be removed from the list, and any attempt to remove persons from the list outside of that process would be unlawful, null, void, unconstitutional, and of no effect. The GCOM statement quotes parts of the judgment of Chief Justice Roxanne George, to which I normally make reference, and set out the relevant portions of the judgment. Perhaps we should have written it out for Mr. Norton, because apparently when he saw it in writing, in that GCOM statement, he now understands. So today at his press conference, his position is a different one. He begins the press conference with a very sacred declaration that the APNU AFC is not opposed to constitutional and or statutory changes that would permit a clean voters list. So that is his new position now. So he agrees that changes have to be made in the law for you to change the content of the list. I am not admitting that the list is bloated. I don't accept his position, but at least he has come to the realization that his demands were nonsensical and that he was behaving like a bull in a china shop. He now recognizes that. Now he has changed his call fundamentally. He's now calling for legal reforms, which is a completely different matter from what he was saying all the time. I am asking Mr. Norton to apologize to the Guyanese people for putting them through the ordeal that he has done over the past 3 months. He ought to apologize to his supporters that he misled them when he wanted the list to be scrapped and a new list to begin. Now he understands what we have been trying to say to him for the past 3 months. And he should do the decent thing, accept that he misunderstood or he never understood the law and the position in relation to the list, and apologize. It would not take much out of him, but I think he will win a lot of respect if he goes down that road. But let us see if he will do that. So let me go and see what your comments are. Somebody is saying why the major press media do not carry Mr. Norton's press conference. I don't know. You may have to ask the media that. But I saw the press conference just now, well, this afternoon, and I saw the massive change in position, which of course he would like us to gloss over, because he would never want to admit his failure to comprehend what the legal position was or what the policy position was. He would never admit that. So he would gloss over it, and he may even want to argue, because that is how he is, confrontational. He may want to argue that that is all that he meant. He didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. He didn't understand. He now appears to understand. And that is important, that we call him out on that. So I want to extend on from this platform congratulations to the board of directors who have been appointed under the Natural Resources Fund Act. As you know, that act, very important piece of legislation, that is the act that will govern the receipt, management, and expenditure of proceeds from the oil and gas sector. And that act, as we have said, embraces the standard of transparency and accountability required of such legislative framework, and it has within it several layers of oversight, beginning with a board of directors and a public accountability and oversight committee, as well as an investment committee. So it's 3 layers: the board of directors, members of the public accountability and oversight committee, as well as members of the investment committee. And they were all appointed today. The board of directors are Mr. Joseph Singh, Major General retired, no stranger to Guyana, former chairman of GCOM, and former chief of staff of the Guyana Defense Force. So Major General Joe Singh is the chairman. Former PNC MP Dunstan Barrow is a member of the board. The Public Service Commission has a nominee, and it is Mr. Ramesh Duku. Then there is Caroline Rodriguez Burkett, Guyana's permanent representative at the UN, the United Nations. She is also a board member. And the fifth director is a former Caribbean Development Bank president, Professor Compton Bourne. And Professor Bourne replaces United Kingdom Member of Parliament David Lammy, who could not have served due to obligations in the United Kingdom. So that is the type of board that we have. You would recall that we were accused that we will put PPP lackeys on the board. Well, these are the directors: Joe Singh, Dunstan Barrow, Ramesh Duku, who is a PSC nominee, Caroline Rodriguez, and Professor Bourne. So you see the mix. You have ethnic mix, you have sectoral mix, you have gender mix, and that is how we select persons. You have a PNC person there, a former PNC member of parliament. So I don't know what the apartheid people will say about this, because you have two Afro-Guyanese, two Indo-Guyanese, and one Amerindian. So I don't know whether that meets the racial criteria of this rabid bunch that scrutinizes everything from the lens of race, but that is what you have. And I want to congratulate all these persons for accepting the appointment to serve on this very important organization and in this important infrastructure. They have to play a pivotal role in ensuring that the monies that are received from the oil and gas sector are channeled in accordance with the Act into the consolidated fund, and then withdraw from the fund using the required and lawfully prescribed appropriation mechanisms and for the purpose designated by the Act. So they essentially have to ensure that this Act is complied with in its letter and in its spirit. As far as I am aware, these are 5 distinguished Guyanese. But of course, in Guyana, everyone have a different view of things. So I said some time ago that I will use this program to speak out against racism and attempt to divide our people along ethnic and racial lines. And I intend to do so again tonight. You are aware that there was an attempt, I am not sure whether the event occurred, to hold an event that was described as an event to empower Afro-Guyanese, and it was done under the theme that there is an emerging apartheid state in Guyana, against Afro-Guyanese. I wrote a pretty long letter to the press. Well, it was an article which was published in the press denouncing this proposed forum because it is evil to Guyana. It is destructive to our people, and it is unlawful and unconstitutional to peddle that type of philosophy and to make that type of publication. I outlined in that article that we have a written constitution that has in it a Bill of Rights that accords with the Bill of Rights contained in most constitutions across the world. It is a Bill of Rights that is akin to the United Nations Charter of Rights, the Canadian Charter of Rights, and it embraces all the recognized fundamental rights and freedoms of our country. I pointed out that that very Constitution accords protection against discrimination on the ground of race, ethnicity, religion, and almost every conceivable ground. That Constitution protects Guyana and Guyanese from discrimination of that type. That Constitution also says that any freedom, any expression that is intended to excite racial hostilities is not protected by the freedom of expression that that Constitution guarantees. I made reference to a number of laws across our legal landscape that outlaw discrimination on the ground of race and ethnicity, and indeed on every conceivable ground. That is the legal architecture of Guyana. Against that legal architecture, these people are arguing that there is racial apartheid. Now, apartheid is a system of segregation based upon race. It was a system that was imposed in South Africa from in the 30s all the way to 1993. And it was imposed by law. That's the first thing. The South African legal system permitted this as a matter of law. So the country was divided as a matter of law, and areas were segregated for different races of people by law. So by law, one race couldn't do something. By law, one race couldn't participate in certain activities of the state. This is not by policy alone, by law. And then the policies followed the law. And what you had was a segregated country by law passed by the Parliament of South Africa. So racial discrimination and segregation was legal, was authorized by the laws and legal system of South Africa. Juxtapose that to Guyana. The laws and legal system of Guyana outlaws racism and racial segregation of every type. The supreme law of the country says that no law shall discriminate. No action of the state shall discriminate. How can you have apartheid as a system emerging anywhere? That is why these people are described as the lunatic fringe of society. South Africa did not have a constitution until 1993. It is after, with the end of apartheid, you had with the rise of Nelson Mandela, then in 1993, you had a constitution of South Africa in keeping with the rest of the world. South Africa was one of about 4 countries in the entire world that did not have a written constitution. Out of about 174 countries in the world, South Africa was among about 4 that did not have a constitution until 1993. And it is in 1993 that they passed Bill of Rights, like what we have, to outlaw discrimination and to afford discrimination as a fundamental right, protection against discrimination as a fundamental right. It's only in 93 they had that, when segregation was collapsed and abolished and all the laws regarding segregation were repealed. I am explaining all of this to you so that you understand what apartheid is, and to show you how bizarre this hypothesis is that seek to suggest that you have apartheid emerging in Guyana. In that article, and I encourage all of you who are interested in this topic to go and read it, because I dealt also with what those who are pretending to represent Afro-Guyanese interest, what they did, or rather did not do for Afro-Guyanese when they were in government. And now that they are out of government, what they are professing and pretending to do. I also highlighted what they did for themselves, because they did a lot for themselves. And I highlighted all of that in that article. So you should read that article. And I will spend as much time as I possibly can to explain away how evil these persons are and what their intentions are, who are trying to divide and destroy our people and our country. I will do that every time I get the opportunity on this program. And I have here, apart from the laws, I made some notes about important posts in this country. So we have a constitutional system of government that divides governmental power into 3 branches: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So let us look at the executive. Let us look at the executive. You have a prime minister who is Afro-Guyanese. You have the Home Affairs Minister, Afro-Guyanese. You have the Foreign Affairs Minister, Afro-Guyanese. You have the Senior Minister of Public Works, Afro-Guyanese. You have the Minister of Trade and Industry and Commerce, Afro-Guyanese. You have the Minister of Labor, Afro-Guyanese. You have the Minister with responsibility for public communications, Afro-Guyanese. And that's just at the cabinet level. That is just at the cabinet level. And these people want persons to believe that there is some apartheid emerging state in Guyana. That's the executive I just dealt with. Let's go to the judiciary. The chancellor, the chief justice, the chief magistrate are all Afro-Guyanese. I don't want to do this, but it is important that we remember these things. The registrar of the Supreme Court, who is the accounting office of the judiciary, is Afro-Guyanese. The head of the army is Afro-Guyanese. The head of the police force is Afro-Guyanese. And I can continue across the entire state spectrum. I can go into the accounting officers for all the ministries, all the permanent secretaries. Ministers don't run ministries, you know. Ministries are run by permanent secretaries. They manage the central government of the country. The PS, the Permanent Secretary of Education, Public Service, Health, Legal Affairs, Home Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Agriculture, Natural Resources, Youth, Sports and Culture, all Afro-Guyanese. The Chief Accounting Officer of the Legislature, who is the Clerk of the National Assembly. He is the Chief Executive Officer, the Accounting Office of the Parliament. He is the Clerk of the National Assembly, Afro-Guyanese. This information is disclosed because sometimes we have to speak out, because if we remain silent, the misleading, divisive, and destructive narrative can overwhelm the voice of reason, and the truth can become concealed and hidden for a long time. And that is why I am disclosing this kind of information, to put it out there in the public domain, to debunk these persons. And these persons who are making these disclosures, as I said on a television program last night, are so jaundiced in their orientation and in their thinking. Imagine there is a professor, not an ordinary man, a professor. This is a highly educated human being. He has the highest academic qualification, a doctorate. And he says that he finds it, well, I don't know what's the terminology he used, but based upon his expression, he finds it reprehensible that an Indo-Guyanese woman can sell black pudding, and that Afro-Guyanese are lining up to buy. Can you process that statement? The first revulsion of his is that it's an Indo-Guyanese woman selling black pudding. That by itself, to him, is an outrage. That by itself. His brain can't process that. And then the second component of the outrage is that Afro-Guyanese are lining up to buy it. That second component also makes him causes him serious mental anguish. Do you know the quality of mentality that you're dealing with there? Do you know the quality of mind, the toxicity of mind that you're dealing with? How poisoned that mind is, who is processing information in that way? And these are the persons who are speaking on public platforms and want to divide this country and create discord among the people of our country. But I take comfort and I take solace from the fact that our people are educated and are sensible and are not falling prey to such venomous diatribe. That is what it is. Venomous diatribe. People are not bothering with these people. And that is why they are becoming more and more desperate. And the more and more Guyanese advance economically, financially, and socially, including Afro-Guyanese, the more and more irrelevant those narratives will become, and those who preach them will eventually become obsolete. Obsolete. And we are not far from that eventuality taking place. We are not far from that eventuality taking place. So I thought that I would spend some time in dealing with this matter, because quite apart from the fact that it is a main issue in our country and every Guyanese should discuss it, it is a constitutional wrong. It is a crime under the Racial Hostilities Act for this type of language to be published and this type of narrative to be disseminated. And as Attorney General, I consider it my duty to speak out against these sordid but serious constitutional atrocities and human rights travesty. This is a human rights travesty. They are pitting one human being against the other based upon race and appealing to people's basal instincts. They want to make Indo-Guyanese the enemy of Afro-Guyanese. That is what their game plan is. To tell the Afro-Guyanese that the Indo-Guyanese are reaping the bounty. They never go into the communities of this country. They never walk the villages of this country to see poverty at all levels, including in the Amerindian areas. They have never been to the Amerindian areas to see poverty. They've never been into Indo-Guyanese community to see poverty. They don't go into the Afro-Guyanese villages at the back to see the poverty. But most of them earn a livelihood. Most of them earn a livelihood from this type of activity. They earn a livelihood from it. They draw sustenance. If this racism can disappear, they don't have any relevance anymore. They live off of it. And that is why the term parasitic is very apt. Is very apt. The term parasitic, their existence is parasitic of the ordinary people of this country. And we have to call them out for what they are and for who they are. That's the only way we can put an end, and we have to do it collectively. All the races of this country, all the people of this country have to play their part. I am playing my part here. I am doing what I can do. It is your duty to also do something about it. So let me see what the comments are. I still want to hear from you. And the viewers are inviting me, and perhaps I can deal with, but I don't want to do that, because two wrongs do not make a right. Because I can speak to a period in Guyana that really resembles apartheid. I can do that, where generations of Guyanese had to run to Canada, and they actually said that they were chased off their homelands because of their race, and they were given refugee status. Generations of Guyanese, many of you looking at this program, your parents and your relatives went to Canada pleading that you fled from your homeland because of racial discrimination, because of persecution and prosecution on the basis of race. I can say that, and I can produce verifiable data. But I would like us to sweep that, while it's important history, that is not a narrative to resuscitate now. I don't believe that the two narratives running together can help the cause that I am advocating for. I am advocating for the building of a society that is based upon meritocracy, where people are judged upon merit, upon qualities and qualifications, and not skin color and hair texture. And that's the type of discourse that I want. Let us have that kind of discourse. And if you have evidence of racial discrimination, then make it public. That's all I'm saying. That's all we are saying. You have evidence of racial discrimination, then make it public. I hear a lawyer of good standing say one night on television that an Afro-Guyanese went to a bank for a loan and he was rejected. And somehow he changed his name and got an Indo-Guyanese surname. And apparently his application for the loan was granted. And this is a lawyer who is saying so. I have never heard anything so ridiculous. So the bank, I don't know. First of all, government and the PPP, we don't control any banks. Banks are owned by people, private sector, they run their banking business according to their rules and regulations. You have to qualify before you get a loan. And I don't know of any bank where the qualification is your surname or your first name. I don't know of any bank, honestly. You have to have collateral security. You have to be able to show an ability to repay the loan. That which you're taking the loan to do must be a feasible venture. Those are the factors. You must have you must be of an appropriate age and of good health to be able to pay back the loan. If there is a guarantee that is required, then your guarantor must be good to guarantee the loan, to secure the loan. Those are the factors that a bank would take into account. Now, if you don't qualify because you are unable to amass that kind of qualification, that's a different matter. But don't tell me that because one is one race, the bank gives the loan, and because one is another race, the bank doesn't give the loan, and it's not based upon qualifications. Because I know many Afro-Guyanese who have loans too. Thousands of them. So this narrative is simply wicked. It is wicked. And it comes from people with a particular mentality. Maybe it's, I don't know if it's a deficiency, I don't know what is it. I really don't know. So it is important though that we discuss these matters. the first step in finding a solution to a problem is to identify the problem and then discuss it. Discuss it. And if it's a public problem, discuss it publicly. We can't keep sweeping these matters under the carpet and expect the problems to be solved. It will not happen that way. It has never happened that way. Discussions, intelligent exchanges, symposia, debates, those are the types of exchanges that we must have. And those who make assertions must be able to substantiate it with empirical data of a credible nature. And if our society begins this discourse, I have no doubt that we are a sufficiently talented people to see the wrongs of going down a path of discord, segregation, and division. And that we will see that unity is the only road that will lead every Guyanese to prosperity and to progress. So, brothers and sisters, thank you very much for joining me over the past hour. I believe that we have covered a lot of ground and we have discussed the important issue of race relations in our country. And as much time as we spend discussing these matters, I believe it is in our best individual interest and it is in our best collective interest. And we need to denounce those who are attempting to spread division, hatred, and discord among and between our people and our major races. Thank you very much. Please enjoy the rest of the evening and enjoy the rest of this week. I will see you again next week as we continue to discuss issues in the news. May God bless you. Thank you.